Dear learners, you must be familiar with research process, identification of research problems. The basic concept of communication, you need to understand that the communication never happens in isolation. Communication always involves various stakeholders. The quality of information will increase based on acquiring various information from multiple sources. That efforts has to be taken. The concentration of knowledge, concentration of information will be based on how much effort is being taken by a particular individual by collecting resources or information from various segment. The resources can be another person, another expert, or library or literature. Literature provides substantial contribution for improving someone's knowledge. The quality of knowledge, quality of information enhances by reading more literature. This is the reading part. When we come to research, the research in the entire research process, reading referring literature constitutes significant contribution. For example, if we are considering a research process takes around 10 steps or 100 marks we are involved in the research process, the 40% of a research process involves with dealing with the literature. Now you can understand the significance of the role of literature in any research settings. Without reading literature, without referring literature, without handling the literature, you may not be able to improve the quality of your outcome, quality of your study. And the quality of your study, that is a parameter in which the reports are published or recommended or get popularity in the literature reviews or in the scholarly area. So that is the role of literature in any research settings, be it in a science or social science. But it's not a very simple process of going to library, collect the book, collect the literature, and reading any books related to our interest area. Research itself is systematic, very scientific manner. Same concept is applicable to identifying literature and collecting those literature and storing it, referring it in our research process. There's a system is involved in that. This presentation deals with that system and systematic way of collecting literature and integrating that literature into any research settings. I have research scholar Akriti Taneja. So, Akriti, tell us more about the importance of review of literature and its role in any research settings.
So, when we talk about review of literature is essentially the foundation of all kinds of research. Whether it's academic research, whether you're going for descriptive research, whether it's exploratory, whether it's an experimental research, quantitative or qualitative. It is important for all stages of research, whether it is at identifying research area, whether it is about identifying your research topic, the data methodology that you'd want to adopt, or data analysis part of it. Review of literature is the most important part of research. The purpose of conducting a review of literature is to collate the existing literature, the knowledge that has already been done with regard to the topic, classifying it, and writing a part or a portion of your research paper or a part of your thesis. So, as we've understood, review of literature is one of the most important elements. But what is the exact need or importance of conducting a review of literature? It is to synthesize the arguments that other scholars across the globe, across years, have been talking about certain academic field, whether it's about media information literacy and children and child rights specifically, what kind of authors have focused upon it, the kind of arguments that have posed about it, whether they're talking about the risks or the opportunities or the threats or the strengths with regard to the literature that they're focused upon. Therefore, review of literature will deal with the arguments as well as the counter arguments of a particular topic that you have chosen. Review of literature will also help you in identifying the methodology that people have already taken up forward. For example, if a couple of scholars have already been working on content analysis and interview schedule, if you think that that is a relevant field, and since scholars have already talked about it, a review of literature might help you in finding the particular tool, whether it's identifying a schedule, whether it's identifying a survey tool, or it is also identifying the variables, the concepts, the constructs. This particular aspect of research will emphasize on all of it altogether. Now, the perspective of a researcher will also come into the picture here. Without making it biased, your objectivity will help you interpret the literature that is existing to identify a new side of research here. It will also set the context of your research, the kind of geography that you want to focus upon, the space, the time that you want to focus upon, and also to find elements of similarities and differences across the literature that you've been reading about. So, essentially, review of literature will help you from topic selection to coming about to the research problem and at the report writing stage as well. When we talk about the objectives of review of literature, there are 5 broad objectives of conducting a review of literature. So, the field of research might have various tangents involved, whether it's the concepts, whether the topics, whether these are theories, such as when we talk about media information literacy. Potter, as we talk about, is a prominent scholar. And when we talk about child rights and digital communication, digital media, Sonia Livingstone is a prominent author. So, a review of literature would help you to build those key ideas and concepts. The second aspect of conducting, or the objective of conducting a review of literature, is to sharpen those research objectives and hypotheses. First is to identify the seminal landmarks or the momentum that is brought across in a particular research. When I talk about research objectives and hypotheses, there are various aspects involved, whether those are the keywords, the concepts, or the constructs, and the variables that can be measured, basically the terms of inquiry. A review of literature will help you to identify those parts as well. It will also help you to select appropriate theoretical frameworks or conceptual frameworks, as well as the research design. Now, for example, when we talk about a certain aspect such as climate communication, a review of literature will help you identify the frameworks that other scholars have already used for this particular work. So, for example, someone can look at it from the perspective of risk communication. Another scholar can look at it from the perspective of, awareness levels. So, those kind of frameworks can emerge from a review of literature. Similarly, the methodology, if one person is surveying, another person is interviewing, or if they're just plainly looking at the content analysis from the quantitative and qualitative side of it, review of literature would essentially help you to identify that. The fourth objective of conducting a review of literature is to identify the practical problems involved. When we talk about research, it is time bound, it is efforts and resources bound as well. Therefore, you cannot conduct research spanning across 3 years for a research paper. However, you can do the same thing for a thesis. Therefore, the practical problems related to your particular area can be focused upon from the review of literature, and such suggestions and reflections have been brought across by authors in the review of literature itself also. Also, the scope of the study, if you have too many objectives, if the research has too many methods involved, if a quantitative and a qualitative research, whether a survey or an interview would go together, or a survey or an FGD would go together, or plainly a textual analysis and a content analysis, that is a quantitative method, would go along together, can also be identified via a review of literature. The fifth objective of conducting a review of literature is to avoid all kinds of duplication of work. Now, we might have come across ideas when it comes to conducting research, whether you think that is exponential and it can go beyond. But once we go through literature that have already been done, we might see that such kind of research has already been done, and perhaps another gap can emerge from that. For example, if I talk about climate communication from the perspective of visual imagery, perhaps scholars might have focused upon in the developed countries context. A research gap similarly can emerge and show across that, well, such studies have not been done in a developing country context, and such kind of studies can be taken forward. A review of literature will also help you in avoiding duplication of work and to find new ideas, and review of literature therefore helps here. I hope that answers your question, Arul sir.
Yes, actually, your presentation clearly signifies that the review of literature helps any student or any scholar to fine tune their research topic to research problem, further into research objectives and aims, and also helps them to figure out the required methodological design, and also to helps them to avoiding the duplication thing. This is very clear about the objective of a review of literature. But as we indicated earlier about the review of literature, also a very systematic manner. So explain about the process involved in the review of literature, collecting literature from various sources.
Okay, so the process involved in conducting a review of literature, I'd broadly categorize it into three aspects. First is the identification part of it, as in how do you identify and come across literature to review them. The second would be the writing part of it, and the third would be to summarizing it essentially across and comparing and contrasting with your own research. So when I talk about conducting a review of literature, the first part of it is searching for the literature. Now, how do you come about searching the literature that you'd want to evaluate? That involves finding keywords appropriate to your own research. Now, they may emerge from the topic available already. For example, if you're talking about media information literacy, so media and information literacy, and along with that, the target audience, for example, if you're talking about children, those would become your keywords essentially, and the synonyms along with that would become your keywords. The second part of it would be searching. Now, searching for literature is a tedious process, but I would suggest you to look at various databases to what you have access for, such as Sage, Oxford, Taylor and Francis. If you do not have access to that, go to Google Scholar. Google Scholar has the answer to all of your solutions. Most of the literature that you want to evaluate, you'll be able to find them on Google Scholar. Third is to give an overview glimpse of the literature that you're already searching for. So once you'll be looking at the literature, you'd be able to see the kind of authors that are coming about, the countries that have been focused upon, the years that have been focused upon. Then you can do a brief analysis of what kind of literature you'd want to select. After you've done that, start selecting your literature. Next, go ahead and do a preliminary reading. Look at the titles of the articles that you have chosen. Look at the disciplines and the dimensions that I'm focusing upon. For example, if you're talking about climate communication, a psychology perspective might or might not be useful for you. That is up to you to decide. So therefore, do a preliminary reading to understand the kind of perspective that the scholar is coming about. You can also create a literature map. Now, this is not essential for each and every one. However, it will be helpful for you to identify the kind of area that has been mapped out by other scholars. Therefore, this will create an identity of the literature and gauge what has been done before. After that, start summarizing and assembling the literature. Now, we'll be talking about the process in a more in-depth manner. When I talk about searching for literature, I would suggest you to first identify the keywords. After every abstract in a well written review of literature, you'd find a set of keywords. Use that and look at the synonyms of those keywords as well. After you're done with identifying the keywords, create a mind map. Now, a mind map is very important for a review of literature because it helps you in mapping out the certain sections of those keywords, whether it's about an issue. So, for example, if I'm talking about climate communication, the issues pertaining to climate communication, that is adaptation, mitigation, whether it is specifically focusing on imagery, those are the type of issues that you can focus upon. The second tangent of creating a mind map can be the target audience. That is here when you decide what kind of audience you want to target, whether it's children, whether it's rural women, whether it's PWD, whether it's another section of the society that has not been dealt upon and in any context with regard to your issue. The third aspect is the type of the media. Whether you're focusing upon newspapers, whether you're focusing upon TV, whether it's online media, if it's social media, if it is a digital media spectrum altogether, what kind of keywords that you want to choose and what kind of focus you'd want to bring about would build your mind map. The third part of searching for literature is creating the strings. Now you can use Boolean words such as and, capital A and OR, capital OR, to search your literature and to formulate those strings. After that, you'd be able to search for literature. Now, those strings you can use on databases, on libraries, online libraries specifically, and with that, you'd be able to search for more literature. You can also filter that literature down. Once you've identified the strings, you'd be able to see this particular author has focused upon, say, climate communication, and this particular author has talked about climate imagery. That'll help you in finding certain literature, and from that literature you can also see if the references are in tandem with what you want to observe. Therefore, you can find search more literature from the references of the literature that you're choosing already. There are a lot of sources involved in searching literature, whether you want to look at book chapters, whether those are journal articles, whether those are monographs, whether those are conference papers, policy documents, etc. Also, when it comes to searching for literature, you should also keep that in mind that your review of literature would be very in-depth in nature. However, your introduction will involve literature which are talking about statistics, which are basically talking about the gist of your research. So you should also collect literature pertaining to your introduction as well. Next, we'll talk about on how to select literature. Now, when it comes to selecting literature, you should also first look at the title of the paper that you're choosing. Then you should look at the abstract and the keywords. Abstract would be able to help you if that particular paper is up for you to choose or not. Then after you're done with looking at the abstract and the keywords and looking at it from the dimension or the perspective of what you want, you can look at the main body of the paper. Now, for selecting this literature, there are three tangents involved in it. First is the amount of information that you're getting. This will essentially be the number of hits that you're getting on Google Scholar or on other databases, the saturation of the theme or the topic, that is how much literature is being done on this particular topic. For example, as I already gave you on climate communication pertaining to visual imagery in developed countries, if a lot of literature has already been done on it, you can look for it from the perspective of conducting perhaps descriptive research. Whereas if that topic has not been taken up forward by a lot of researchers, you can always take up an exploratory research or a grounded theory method for conducting research. Therefore, this will also be of a sense for you when it comes to the amount of information that you're getting. Then you can also identify the temporal or the spatial relevance. What I mean by that is the geography of that research. For example, if we're talking about climate communication, if the research has already been done in a lot of developed countries, you do not want to do it in the developed country context again. You might want to look at it from the global southern context. Therefore, this will help you in selecting literature. The second aspect of selecting literature is the level of information. Now, for level of information, you also want to look at the credibility of the information that you're getting. For credibility, you might have to look at the impact factor of a journal, the credibility of the author that you're choosing, the publishing years. For example, you might not want to choose literature which has been done in 1999, for example. It might help you in the introduction part of it or the conceptual theoretical part of it. But when it comes to analyzing the arguments and the core arguments, evidence, counter evidence, it might not be of much essence. Therefore, publishing year would be of essence here. You can also look at the reputation of the journal. Again, the impact factor of the journal would be come into the picture here. The prominence of information. Now, for example, if a research has already been done into the quantitative side of it, when I talk about child rights, qualitative side of it has already been done about quite a number of times. When I talk about climate communication and the visual imagery part of it, it has been done from the quantitative side of it quite a lot. Therefore, you might want to delve into the qualitative side of it. Then you can look at the depth of information that you're getting from the review of literature, the type of research that has been conducted, the findings that are coming about, and the relevance of those findings with regard to your own research. Here is an example of organizing the literature that you're getting. Once you've searched for literature, you've selected literature, next part is to organize that literature. This is just a gist of what I did. You can look at it from the perspective of the publishing year, the author, the title, the theme. So the theme and the sub-theme is something that you can give essentially from your own perspective. The literature type would be a journal article, if it's a thesis, dissertation, if it's a book chapter, the country that is in focus in this particular title, and the theoretical conceptual framework, the design methodology, and the findings that have been brought about in this particular literature would help you in writing as well as summarizing what you want to write. So I think that answers your question, sir.
Yes. So now it's clear that once you have research topic or a theme is being finalized or clear, so you'll come with keywords, and those keywords you will arrange it in a very proper string, because quite easy to collect more literature from online field. The library, of course, library have more number of books and journals, but because many university colleges nowadays subscribing to many online databases. There are many online free databases also available, but the basic structure of online databases is it stores billions of data, billions of literature. So now the challenge before the students is to identify the required relevant literature for your topic, for your theme and your research problem. So that through a very proper manner, if you're able to identify literature in the shortest possible time, that saves your time and energy, and you can spend more time by reading and enhancing your knowledge about that. So now we got more literature, relevant literature. We may have inclusion exclusion criteria. You may go only for research journals, or you may go only for dissertations, or you may go for only book chapters. So you may have a criteria in which it depends upon the topic. You will identify a certain number of literature that I will go through that. Through that, I will figure out the research gap that will strengthen your aims and objectives. That's very clear. So now, before writing aims and objectives, we need to put all the understanding from the literature, synthesizing all your knowledge in a chronological, in a logical manner. Similar to the literature collection in a systematic way, the presenting your understanding to the outside world is also should be in a very systematic, in a logical manner. There is a process involved with that. Akriti, explain that process of writing a review of literature.
So, when we talk about writing a review of literature, there are three aspects on how you can write your review of literature. First is the chronological part of it. So, you'll of course start with the earliest publication. In this particular aspect, you'll emphasize on how research area has been dealt with by various authors across the years. However, it may lack certain continuity because there'll be breaks in between. So, for example, if I'm talking about children digital participation, some literature might focus upon well, say the opportunities with regard to digital participation in 2021, for example. However, in 2022 it might talk about the risks and opportunities. Similarly, in say 2015, the focus was on SDGs from this particular perspective. Therefore, in chronological there may be a lack of continuity. However, the second way of writing a review of literature is from the thematic point of view. The focus will be on the emergent themes. Therefore, thematic way would emphasize on the areas and the concepts that have emerged. However, you can also focus upon the chronological part of it, as in certain years have been focusing upon this kind of research in this particular aspect, and this particular time is focusing upon another area of research. The third way of conducting or writing your review of literature is a methodological way, wherein you're assimilating the theories or the methods that authors have used on a particular theme. For example, say a couple of scholars have talked about content analysis. These three, four scholars have been talking about interview. These five have an interview schedule and a survey method, that is a mixed method approach. The thematic way of organizing your material is the most prominent way to go forward. However, it is completely up to you if you're going for a meta-analysis. Chronological way of organizing your literature would come into the picture here. When I talk about writing the review in a very broad context, the idea is to use academic literature in all ways. You should not bring upon your personal opinions, not be biased in any way. You should also formulate the presentation using the literature map if you're, for example, conducting a PhD thesis. However, it might not be of a sense when it comes to writing a qualitative research paper, but a literature map may be able to help you in assimilating the information that is coming about. Now, essentially, the review of literature has three broad aspects when it comes to the writing part of it. First is the introduction, the second is the body, and the third is the summary. You can also use behavioral terms such as argues, claims, emphasizes, observes, stresses, states in order to make your argument. These are more academic in nature and would help you to build your argument in a much more better way. You can also use transitional devices such as in addition, similarly, furthermore, nonetheless, however, etc. to make your argument. If you're posing an argument and a counter argument together, transitional devices are of essence here. When I talk about the presentation of different views, now review of literature, as I've already talked about, should have both the views, both the sides of the coin in your review of literature. Therefore, you can use words such as on the other hand, in contrary, to make arguments and counter arguments together. Now, when I talk about writing the review, as I already said, there are three parts of it. First is the introduction. Now, the introduction will set the tone and the context of your review of literature. It will provide a link between the previous chapters. That is, from your introduction, you'll come about to the review of literature. It will also guide the researcher on what they should expect in this particular review of literature, and the central themes and core aspects can be introduced here. Next comes the body of the review of literature. Now, the body of the review of literature is the most important part here because it will highlight the arguments and counter arguments, and it will go in depth with regard to the literature that you have reviewed. It will also describe the research methods. Now that I've already been talking about review of literature, the review of literature is not just about the major findings of a research. It is also about identifying the research methods, the frameworks, theoretical or conceptual, as well as the gap that might emerge. Therefore, the body is assimilating all of that together. The summary essentially will capture the essence of the major findings of the theme area, and it will move on towards the research problem to a greater extent. Now, when we talk about writing the review of literature, it is about treading a very thin line, whether you're presenting the information in a very accurate manner or not. Therefore, you should see that the accuracy of the information that you're presenting of other scholars is completely taken into account. You should also separate your own opinion from that of the source, that is, of the literature. You should also be respectful to the authors that you're analyzing, therefore, look into account on what kind of research that they have done. You should also give due credit, therefore, in text citation is of utmost importance here. However, you should not plagiarize at all, and you should not give any slant and deviate your argument in any manner in order to throw positive light on your research. I think that accounts for review of literature. I'd request Dr. Arul Selvan to give a summary of what has already been dealt here.
Now we understood the concept of and the role of literature in any research settings. Almost like you're traveling to unknown destination. If you carry the guide map or travel map with you, that saves a lot of your energy. You can go to right destination, you will enjoy your travel. Similarly, the literature review of literature, the literature quality of literature you're collecting, that helps you to put a proper roadmap for your research. Identification research problem also might emanate from the literature review. The entire research process is structured based on literature review. You can call it as a travel guide, or you can call it as a blueprint of your research. Now you can recollect that why we insisted that the review of literature is the most important step in the research process. The whole process is more systematic, identifying literature and collecting in a very systematic manner, arranging it in a required level, then synthesize it, read it, synthesize it, write a literature review on that part. So that is the whole idea of review of literature. Thank you.